As you may know, biblical archaeology is also quite controversial. Especially when we go back in history and talk about early Israel. The farther we get back in history, the more complicated things become. And critical scholars, historical critical scholars, are very skeptical towards the history of the Bible, especially the early parts of the Bible. When we talk about the Pentateuch, the book of Joshua, book of Judges, and Samuel, critical scholars would consider those books to be more or less fiction. Ideological, theological books with a good message, perhaps, but fiction, myths, folk stories, folk tales that we cannot really rely on for historical matters. And that's of course a very pressing question, because if we cannot trust the historical claims of the Bible, can we then trust the theological claims of the Bible? The Bible, after all, is a historical book. It's about the history of God with His people and in this world. So if we cannot trust the historical claims, then what else can we not trust in the Bible? So biblical archaeology is also important for those reasons, that we need to engage with biblical archaeology, to engage with the history of the Bible, in order to be able to engage with these questions of the trustworthiness of the Bible. So today we have 2 lectures ahead of us. Today I want to first focus on the Tabernacle at Shiloh. In particular, I want to focus on how much can we actually know about the history of early Israel. And Shiloh is, of course, a very important place to go, because this was where the Tabernacle was located, according to the Bible, for several hundred years. Apparently, Shiloh, or Shiloh as it is known in the Bible, was the cultic center and administrative center of early Israel for at least 200 years and maybe 400 years, depending on some chronological issues. And after a break, I will continue with the kingdom of David. So we're focusing on the early history of Israel. The tabernacle is this structure, and I don't think any archaeologist would expect us to find a tent in Shiloh. Tents don't tend to last for 3,000 years. So this is a replica from Timnah in southern Israel. And so if you go to Israel, you can actually see a replica of this sanctuary, with the altar outside, a water bowl to cleanse, and almost everything that we read from the Bible. But we may not be able to, or most likely will not find a tent in Shiloh, but maybe we will actually be able to find some kind of cultic remains, some kind of sanctuary. And indeed, the archaeologists that excavate Shiloh in these years claim that they have come close to find some sort of sanctuary that may have been the tabernacle of the Israelites, or some further development of that sanctuary. So let's go to Shiloh and see what we can find. As already stated, I am not an archaeologist by training, but I went to Shiloh once, actually more than once, but I attended one season of excavation at Shiloh, and this is me in the back of this group. It's nice to go on excavation, so if you ever have the opportunity to go to Israel or some other country to participate in an excavation, do that. It's amazing, for several reasons, for the fellowship, but also for the fact that you're actually digging and touching dirt and soil that has been untouched since the Israelites were there. So it's amazing. It's really like walking in the footsteps of biblical persons, because you are the first one to touch that particular ground. I've also been the chairman of a Danish Society for Biblical Archaeology, and I just want to make a very short advertisement for this society. We have a website that you can access, bibelskarkeologi.dk. Please feel free to use that website. And more importantly, perhaps, we publish a magazine called Tell. Tell, from Tell Shiloh, Tell Dan, means it's a mount, a ruined mount. So it's a kind of an artificial hilltop or mount full of archaeological remains. So our magazine is called Tell. It's published 4 times a year, and it is meant for I would say ordinary Bible readers, theologians, students, etc. So it's academic, but it's not like what you can say. It's also meant for Bible readers in general, and our goal is to come up with archaeological news, to present archaeological news and explain how it relates to the Bible. I brought some copies that you can take. Also, in the latest issue from this year, that's the one. I have a small article on King David, and in this issue from last year, I have a small article on Shiloh. So if you want a summary in Danish, after this you can take these and read it for yourself. So it's in Danish, but you may consider it a strange Swedish accent. So okay, let's move on to Shiloh. Shiloh is situated in the central part of Israel. Here, between Jerusalem and Shechem, in the central part of the land, in the central highland, as it is called. Today it's the West Bank, so it's not so easy to access, but it's possible. On the right side, you can see Tel Shiloh. It's located in a very beautiful valley, surrounded by mountains. It's a small hilltop, 40 meters above ground, and in the middle you can see this strange-looking construction, which is a museum. And around this strange structure, circular structure, there's a lot of archaeological remains, churches from Byzantine era, but also new excavations of early times. Shiloh is well known from the Bible. I think the first time we meet Shiloh is in Joshua, and we hear that the whole congregation of the people of Israel assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there, and the land lay subdued before them. So they built this mobile structure, the tent of meeting, during their wilderness experience. During the 40 years of the wilderness, they constructed this tabernacle, and when they entered the land, they set up this tent in Shiloh. And at this point, we talk about 15th century before Christ or 13th century before Christ, depending on how you date the Exodus. But that's a longer story. So let's just say it's between 15th and 13th century before Christ. Later on, we hear about Shiloh in the book of Judges, and we hear about Shiloh in the narrative from Judges 21, which is a sad narrative of this scandal, that the horrible thing that the Benjaminites did to a young woman, and is the narrative that also accounts the almost extinction of the Benjamin tribe. But here we read that there was this tradition of a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh. So during the period of the judges, they would go to this place every year. Later, and perhaps more known, is the account of Samuel and his father Elkanah, who used to go up to Shiloh year by year from his city to worship and to sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. And this is where Samuel was brought to by his mom Hannah, and where he would grow up and hear the revelations of God. And this is about 11th century BC. So at this point, the tent of meetings and Shiloh has been in use for about 200 or 400 years. So it's an important first capital, you can say, of Israel. A little later in 1 Samuel, we read that Samuel said, "Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I will pray to the Lord for you." So for some reason, the Shiloh was abandoned. It was probably destroyed, and the shift, the cultic center and administrative center, changed from Shiloh to Mizpah, and later on to some other places before it came to Jerusalem. When we turn to archaeology, Shiloh has been excavated for more than 100 years. Not every year, but the first excavations or the first surveys started in 1922 by a Danish archaeologist. So we are very proud of that in Copenhagen. It's the only dig in Israel with a Danish trait. So Ove Schmidt did the first surveys. He was followed by Hans Kjær. And then in the 80s, Israel Finkelstein, a very famous Israeli archaeologist, also did a few years of excavations. And most recently, Scott Stripling, an American archaeologist from Associates for Biblical Research, a conservative evangelical organization, they're doing the most recent excavations, and they're still working to this day. And I think they want to work for at least 3 or 4 years more. So you still have the chance if you want to find the tabernacle. On your right side, you can see an illustration. It's perhaps not so clear, but you can see that most excavations take part on the northern side, or the northern area of this site. Along the wall, there's a line which represents the wall of the city, and most of the excavations take place alongside this wall. And in 1930, Chester McCown described the objectives of the excavation in this way. So numerous questions remain unanswered. Was the site of Shiloh practically unoccupied during the Bronze Age, or did the Israelites occupy a site already sacred? When did they take it, during the Bronze Age or at the beginning of early Iran? This is another of the sites which, like Ai and Jericho, can assist in determining the date and character of the Hebrew conquest. Was the place unoccupied during the Middle and Late Iron Ages, that is after the loss of the Ark? And was it destroyed by the Philistines, or did it gradually fall into ruins after the loss of the Ark? So many questions remained unanswered in 1930, and I think some of them have been answered by now, and some of them still remain unanswered. But as you perhaps grasp from this quotation, is that Shiloh is important because it relates to the whole question about the Israelite conquest. How was it, and does it really fit with what we know from the Bible? Shiloh is a very complex and complicated site to excavate. We have 9 different layers of occupation. Most recent Islamic occupation until 1917, and since 1917 it has been left unoccupied. Nearby there is a Jewish settlement, but on the site on the mount itself there's no more occupation. Then we have occupation at the time of Jesus, Hasmonean and early Roman time, and then for our purposes the most interesting occupation levels are Iron Age 1, which would be the time of the United Monarchy, and then Late Bronze, which would be the time of the Judges. So those layers are the most interesting. The current objectives, according to the leading archaeologist Scott Stripling, is to expose the inside and outside of the Bronze Age wall and to document the structures along the wall. Apparently Shiloh wasn't that densely occupied, so most interesting things are situated along the wall, and we don't expect so many structures in the middle of the site. It wasn't a real city apparently, but perhaps more like a cultic center that people would go to for sacrifices but not live there. And document the cultic remains, and there are millions, literally, cultic remains. I will come back to that. They want to confirm site strata from previous seasons, and they want to explore the possibility of a postern gate on the north side of the tell. It is for the most part assumed that the gate would be to the south, because that would be most convenient in terms of access to roads and other cities. But the natural water resource would be to the north of the city. So it's a bit strange if they didn't have a gate in the north side or the north area of the wall. So they're looking for that. They want to conserve wall and structures so that we can go and see it in the future. And they want to dry sift and wet sift all material, including the Danish and Israeli dump piles. So the Danes and the Israeli archaeologists left a lot of waste from their own excavations, and with new technology they can actually reassess the material and get even more information out of previous excavations. And they want to determine the extent of the glacis, which is a slope outside the wall that function to protect the wall. Okay, let's move on to the more interesting things, the finds themselves. What has been known for many years is that there is a huge Bronze Age wall from before Israelite occupation. This is what you see in the middle of this picture. This is a drone shot. This is a huge wall from the Middle Bronze Age. And alongside this wall you can see smaller walls perpendicular to this Middle Bronze Age wall, and those are supposed to be storage rooms. Israel Finkelstein excavated those storage rooms, and you can see they quite not so big, but that would be enough space for storing things that people will bring, perhaps as payment of taxes, or maybe as things that you would sacrifice, cereals, for example, that you would bring and sacrifice. Israel Finkelstein uncovered jars like these in these rooms, and these are very typical of the highland region, and by most archaeologists associated with the Israelites. They are not colored, they don't have any patterns, they're very simple and reflect Israelite culture at this time. Philistine Philistine pottery would be much more elaborated and much more colorful and ornated. So this is typical evidence of Israelite occupation in Shiloh. In 2019, this archaeologist identified 3 pieces from an altar. They were not all of equal size. 2 of them were about 38 centimeters wide and 22 centimeters long, and the third one was much smaller. These are altar horns. You can see this horn on the edges of this altar, and we know that from the Bible. That we know they also talk about altar horns that you could, if you were a murderer, could go there and grasp these horns and to get protection from a blood revenge. And those have been identified and they have been found elsewhere as well. It's interesting that they were not found as part of an altar, but as part of a wall. So apparently they have been reused. Maybe they have destroyed a previous altar and used the material for building a wall. Another interesting find is a pomegranate. An apparent pomegranate is not so easy to see, perhaps. But if you look on the bottom here, you can see some petals, as they're called, 4 petals kind of forming a blossom that would represent a pomegranate, the blossom of a pomegranate. And it may have been used as ornamentation of some sort. And later on, someone made a hole in this to use it for perhaps something else, perhaps as a stopper for a jar, something like that. So, but originally it may have been used as some kind of ornamentation, illustrating a pomegranate. There's a similar one in Copenhagen, because the Danish archaeologists brought some nice items back to Copenhagen. You can go to Copenhagen, and you're most welcome. You can go to Copenhagen to the National Museum and see objects from Shiloh. And this one looks similar to the one found in 2018. This is found many years ago, but looks similar, except that it doesn't have these 4 petals, but they may have been cut off for secondary use. So why is pomegranates, why are they important at all? The reason is that pomegranates are used in early Israelite cultic in the temple. So in Exodus it is written that on the hem of the high priest's garment they should make pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet yarns around its hem with bells of gold between them. And we don't expect to find pomegranates made of yarn, because they would of course decay after a few years. But they might have had pomegranates made of clay, and they would of course last till now. Pomegranates were also associated with the temple. And in the temple of Jerusalem, they would make chains of bronze pomegranates around big pillars in front of the temple. So pomegranates were very important for the Israelite cult, as for many other cults at that time. Pomegranates apparently symbolized fertility. Perhaps it also symbolized the Garden of Eden, full of trees, full of fruits and blossoms, and the pomegranate was a symbol of God's blessings. So So it is an important evidence for cultic activity that we have this. They have found something that looks like a pomegranate in Shiloh, and where they found it is also important. But I will get back to that. Another find that is very important is the so-called favisa. A favisa is a kind of a dump pile. That's where you would put all your waste, but not all kinds of waste, but only something that you want to store it or put in a very special place for protection. If you have cultic remains, things associated with the cult that you consider sacred, you wouldn't just throw them away like everything else, but you will store them in a particular place where they could be sealed off and protected, because they would still be considered sacred. And that's what we find in Shiloh. They have found a big area of about 150 square meters, about 0.5 meters till 1.5 meters in depth. So a huge favisa, or dump pile, meant for sacred objects that you don't use any longer, but you don't want just to throw them away. And this favisa is very important because it shows, of course, cultic use at Shiloh and cultic use for many years. It's also interesting when we look at the details of this favisa, what they actually found and still find in this favisa. This is numbers from Israel Finkelstein's excavations, and the American archaeologists continue to work in this area and process the findings once more. But we see that if you just focus on late Bronze Age, that will be the time of the Judges, and Iron Age 1, that will be the time of the first part of the monarchic period. We see that the amount of pig bones is extraordinarily low. From all the remains of late Bronze Age, they found only 5 pig bones, and in Iron Age 1, they found only 1. So that is the same as saying that they didn't sacrifice pigs at all, because they found next to nothing. By contrast, the amount of sheep and goat bones and ox bones are extremely high. It's practically everything that is bones from sheep and goat and oxen. And that's similarly interesting because we know from the Bible that the Israelites most usually would sacrifice sheep, a goat, or oxen, depending on the type of sacrifice and who and the offerer. 2 other interesting facts about this favisa. First, we see that 20% of sheep and goat bones come from young animals. And that's also interesting because we know from the Bible that they would often have to sacrifice 1-year-old animals. And we see that for oxen there's a higher, not much higher, but a little higher percentage of the right thigh. And the right thigh would be the part of the sacrifice dedicated to the priest. So this is also telling, and this is also evidence of Israelite sacrifices. The Philistines, the Canaanites, wouldn't be so shy of using pigs for consumption, perhaps even for sacrifices. So it is interesting. And we see a much higher percentage of pig bones in the Middle Bronze Age, even though it's not dominant. We see destruction layers in Shiloh, and this is a conclusion by Israel Finkelstein in 1986. He says, "These buildings were destroyed in a fierce conflagration. Burned floors were found all over. Collapsed burned bricks accumulated on these floors to a height of more than 3 feet. Some of the bricks had been baked by the blaze that had raged here. Roof collapse was discernible in many places. All this dramatic evidence of fire must be associated with the destruction of Shiloh by the Philistines after they defeated the Israelites near Ebenezer in the mid-11th century BC. Jeremiah knew what he was talking about when he later threatened the people with destruction like Shiloh's." So Israel Finkelstein found a lot of evidence of destruction practically everywhere at Shiloh. I think the Americans a bit more skeptical, but they still consider that Shiloh was destroyed by fire, but they didn't find evidence of fire everywhere. In any case, it is I think it's safe to assume with Israel Finkelstein that Shiloh was destroyed, and I think the Philistines are the most plausible candidates for doing that, because we read in the Bible that there was this war between the Israelites and the Philistines, where the ark was taken captive and taken from Shiloh and ended up in captivity in Philistia, and it may be that the Philistines conquered Shiloh and burned it in the wake of that war. But we don't actually have much information about that in the Bible. Here's it's difficult to see, but if you look at the first row of stones, it's evidence of ashes, which is evidence of fire. The only thing we know about the destruction of Shiloh is from Psalm 78. It says that God forsook his dwelling at Shiloh, the tent where he dwelt among mankind, and delivered his power to captivity. I think that refers to the Ark of the Covenant. His glory to the hand of the foe. He gave his people over to the sword and vented his wrath on his own heritage. Fire devoured the young man, and the young woman had no marriage song. The priest fell by the sword, and the widows made no lamentations. So Psalm 78 talks about fire, and that aligns well with Shiloh. So some preliminary conclusions before we focus a bit more on the tabernacle itself. First, we have clear evidence of Israelite occupation in late Bronze Age and early Iron Age 1, which would be the time where the time of judges and of the early monarchy. So that aligns well with the Bible. And cult activity is clearly confirmed. There are millions of bones and other cultic objects. So this was an important cultic site for the Canaanites before Israel arrived in the land, and also for the Israelites. And destruction is also confirmed. We cannot relate it for certain with the Philistines, but I think it's a good guess. And then what about the tabernacle? Do we have evidence of some Israelite sanctuary at this place? This is we cannot expect, of course, to find an Israelite sanctuary. We cannot expect to find everything that is written in the Bible. Many things could be lost over time and are lost over time. But let's see what we what we got. And what should we expect if we want to find something similar to the Bible? Should we expect to find a tent? Not really, actually, because in 1 Samuel 1:9 we read a perhaps a bit surprising description of this sanctuary. After they had eaten and drunk in Shiloh, Hannah rose, and now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple, literally the palace of the Lord. So this account talks about a doorpost, it talks about a palace, some kind of permanent structure. And this is clearly different from the accounts of and descriptions of the tabernacle in the Pentateuch, where it's clearly a tent. Later it's called the house of the Lord at Shiloh. In 1 Samuel 2:22, it's referred to as the tent of meeting. So yeah, we can speculate what to make of these information, but perhaps it was a combination of some kind of tent structure that gradually became more permanent, or perhaps it was sometimes still called the tent of meeting just for convenience, although it had been transformed into a more permanent structure. And finally, in 1 Samuel 3:15, it's called the house of the Lord with doors. So there's clearly something different going on in 1 Samuel than in the Pentateuch. And that gives us hope to find something more permanent than simply a tent at Tel Shiloh. And I talked about the pomegranate found in 2018 and the 3 altar horns found in 2019. And it's very interesting where they were found. The pomegranate was found in this square, and this is actually where I volunteered myself in 2018. They found the pomegranate just 1 week before I arrived, so that was disappointing for me. But they found the 3 altar horns in the same area and just next to it. So this area, of course, is suggesting some kind of cultic activity in this area. They found an Iron Age wall, quite a big Iron Age wall, 1.2 meters thick, and you can see it's clearly wider than those walls used for the storage rooms. Of course, not as big as the Middle Bronze Age wall, but that was city wall after all. This is just a building within the city, but it's much bigger than the buildings around it. So they followed this lead and tried to excavate more of this corner of building, tried to see if they could find the other corners of the building. They wanted to see the dimensions of it, and so on. And this is the most recent illustration that I've seen. I think this is from last year, and the most recent reconstruction of the site. So here's a Roman wall from approximately the time of Jesus. So let's just ignore that for now and focus on the purple area. This is what I showed you on the last slide, and now they have excavated all through this area and even until this place. So they have excavated most of the building, presumably, and the dimensions are interesting, to say the least. This is an illustration with, or a suggestion of how the building looked like. They haven't yet found anything here. Perhaps there's nothing here. Perhaps they still need to dig in this area. But we may guess that this is what the building looked like in the first place. And the dimensions are telling, of course. If you recall the tabernacle structure, it's exactly the same dimensions. So 1/3 for the central, or the most holiest room, and 2/3 for the holy room. And then we would expect to find an entrance in this area, but they haven't found one yet. They have found something that could be an entrance, but I think they still need to confirm that. So the dimensions are telling it's bigger than what we have in the Bible. I think it's perhaps double size of what we have in the Bible, but the dimensions are the same as a tabernacle. And the direction is also important. This is directed exactly from east to west. This is east, and this is west. So if the entrance were here, they would approach from east and walk towards west, and that's exactly the same what we have in the Bible. A clear east-west orientation of this structure. So dimensions and orientation fit with the biblical account. So it's very interesting, and future excavations will hopefully shed more light. Perhaps we can even find more cultic objects that could further support this analysis. So if indeed this is the Holy of Holies, we have a clear picture of that room. I mean, that's quite interesting, quite exciting, that you can actually walk in the Holy of Holies. And this is the Roman wall that now intrudes and intrudes this the Holy of Holies. So for some reason, several hundred years later, new settlers came and made new walls. A final thing, they've been looking for a gate, as you might remember from early on in this lecture. They were looking for a gate because they suspected that there should be a gate close to the natural water source, 1 kilometer from the city. It would be much easier to exit the city from the north than to exit from the south and then go around the city and to get to the water. And actually they found evidence of a gate. So they found something odd with this wall that suggested that there had been an opening, and now they have found structures outside the wall, and they have found chambers inside the wall. They have found 4 pillars outside the wall of approximately, 2 of them were still standing in 2.6 meters high. So it was actually quite a big gate. And here's an illustration of how the wall, how much we can see of this gate and the walls today. Okay, so in conclusion, I've already made the preliminary conclusions, but to add to those conclusions, we can now say that the tabernacle structure or some sanctuary has plausibly been identified. We don't have the smoking gun yet. We don't have a smoking gun, some kind of a proof. It doesn't really exist in archaeology and history, but I would say in all likelihood we have a sanctuary that would have been used by the Israelites in the time of the judges and in the time of the early monarchy. But let's see, there's still 3 or 4 more seasons of excavation. So next year, if you invite me again, I may have another interpretation, or maybe maybe we can confirm it by then. every year is a new experience, and conclusions are commonly changed.